Hey everyone, welcome back to Seeking Witchcraft. I'm your host Ashley, and today I have on Gabby, who is going to be talking all about using your voice in magic, or aka the magical voice. So Gabby, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Ashley. So, as you said, my name is Gabby. I'm a Gardnerian high priestess, and as well as practicing and teaching Wicca, I also teach eclectic Wiccan-based witchcraft. I've been a solitary witch as well as a member of groves and of covens. I've been running small and large pagan rituals and gatherings in both private and public settings for more than 25 years. And these events have usually had an emphasis on group practice, combining music, storytelling, trance, dance, meditation, silence, gestures, movement, and also an excess of decorative elements because you always need to have the shiny. But I like to give witches and pagans the tools to practice their crafts in ways that work for them. And my background is in video and TV production, scheduling, music, and events. And so, given this, I try to draw upon all of those practical lessons and elements of the mundane crafts to complement and enhance my magical and my ritual world. And just a heads up, I'm not a professional singing teacher or a vocal coach, but I am an experienced ritualist, witch, and singer songwriter. And I try and weave music into most of my rituals and magic. And as everyone can hear, I am also Australian, which means that I circle backwards and my elemental correspondences are upside down. But I did translate things for everybody. So hopefully it will all make sense and you can understand me.
Oh yeah, I think we'll be able to understand. But actually, that might be something new for the listener. So could you explain what you mean when you say that you circle backwards compared to us in
So
this hemisphere?
with it's all to do with the directions and the apparent movement of the sun through the sky. So for the northern hemisphere, which is most of the time you would be going clockwise, and for us we would be going anti-clockwise. Same with a lot of the standard elemental attributions. So we swap north and south for fire and earth because our place of greatest light is in the north and our place of greatest darkness is in the south. So not everyone does it that way, but the majority tend to do that. So we tend to go to casting our circles and everything in an anti-clockwise direction as well. So basically backwards and upside down, which is mostly Australia.
Well, thank you for explaining that. I, as you said that, I was like, oh gosh, I think we should probably get into that. I'm not sure if everyone has
Yeah.
heard of that concept before. But yeah, so going back to the topic, so what is exactly the magical voice? I mean, I'll say I know what this topic is in the sense of we have obviously talked about it before recording this episode, and when we got together about this, I think this is such a cool topic. Like, I think this is such an interesting thing that we're going to dive into. I know this is something I personally would love to incorporate a lot more in my craft. This is not something I use as often as I would like to. So I'm super stoked to hear about all the different things that you have to share today, because I already know I'm going to be stealing some of this for my own personal practice. So I appreciate you so much.
That's okay.
For coming
And
on
look,
to
I
talk
steal
about
chants
this.
from everywhere as well. In my time of being a witch, I've heard lots and lots of chants, and over time I've worked out how to write them and how to use them. So I find I'm a really passionate chanting kind of person, and I do find that I incorporate them into my rituals a lot, mostly because it gives everyone something to do and a way of joining in, but without being too intense around like lots of words that people need to learn. So we try and keep it short and sweet, and everyone can join in and feel like they're contributing in a good way. But for me, the magical voice is a collective term for all of the ways in which we can use our voices in ritual and magic, and that does include chanting. It's both the when we use it and the how we use it. So we might be howling under the full moon with 100 other witches in a park, which I've done on many occasions, or we could be chanting softly in our bedrooms by the light of a single candle, and we're trying not to wake up our household. But it's also everything in between. And to me, the magical voice is active and it's performed with will and intent. And I know that, everyone always uses those words, and that's because they do actually fit with a lot of the things that we're doing in Wicca and witchcraft. And the magical voice doesn't really rely on perfect pitch or a loud volume. You don't actually have to be a singer. It's more of a deliberate state of being. It's a form of energy work. It's a tool, and it does take practice to use, as does most magical tools.
I think it's interesting talking about taking practice to use, because initially someone might think of, you know, memorizing the chants or knowing which context or the tone or pitch to use them. But for me, when I hear that, I actually think of it in practicing getting comfortable with using a ritual voice, because doing something like a chant, there could be a barrier sometimes to saying a chant out loud without that fear or nervousness of sounding silly or feeling silly
Oh,
for what you're
definitely.
doing. And I found, yeah, and I found through my practice that the more you just kind of push against that barrier and just do it over and over and over again, at some point that anxiety, I guess you could say, or call it, kind of drifts away, and then it's not even a thing that you think about anymore.
But it can be really scary and really confronting. And so that's why with some of the notes that I put together for these podcasts, I've kind of gone into ways of starting out and how to actually get yourself used to chanting, because it can be really confronting. And, there's some fabulous chants out there. There's some not so good chants out there. And so if you maybe go with one of the ones that doesn't quite work very well, you can think, well, I can't chant. But you really can. It's just a case of learning how to use the magical voice, just like you'd learn how to dance in a circle. I mean, it's all basically just building up skills and building up our use of particular tools in our ritual practice.
Definitely. And, actually, you brought up a good point. We should probably mention this now at the beginning of the episode. We are planning to have a part 2 to this episode, because Gabby has pulled together so many amazing resources and information for this that I was like, we can't do this in one episode. I don't want you to cut anything out, because this is so good. So let's do 2. So stay tuned. There's definitely going to be a part 2 to this one.
Because I just basically sent Ashley a brain dump. So you'll just have to all deal with that. A musical brain dump.
Yeah. It was all fabulous. It was amazing. I was so impressed, and I'm still so impressed. But yeah, anyway,
that's
sorry.
okay. I just wanted to go into I did mention that that magical voice is an active thing. So I thought I probably should explain a bit about passive and active, because it is something that we use in rituals, and identifying that can actually help you. So as an example of the difference between passive and active, say we're singing along to our favorite playlist, or we're attending a concert. I'm actually going to a concert tonight, so this will be great. I haven't been to one for a while. So it may feel magical and special when we're singing along, but it's generally a passive act, because we aren't usually singing with the magical voice unless we're willfully channeling the energy of the song to some particular purpose. So there are heaps of songs that I've sung along to as I did the washing up, or I swept the floor, or I danced around the kitchen. It's a great way to pass the time doing mundane things. And I listen to podcasts when I'm cleaning, or I sing around the kitchen, or I listen to playlists. But I've also sung those same songs in a ritual setting. And the difference is actually palpable, because I'm singing along with intent and focus, and I'm deliberately using my voice as a tool to raise and channel the energies by my will. So it's a deliberate act. And I'm not saying that you can't sing along to a great playlist whilst you're cleaning and making it magical at the same time, just that you have to actively choose to make it magical. And yes, I do have sweeping chants and songs. And if we've got time, I will chant one at everyone a bit later, because I do have sweeping chants. But also, as a full disclosure, in case, people listening are thinking, I'd be too embarrassed to chant things, I'd be terrible, as Ashley was saying before. My take is, don't worry about it. Dancing around a kitchen, singing, doing lots of things by yourself, that's fine. That's how you actually get used to doing it. Don't be embarrassed. I've written many rituals whilst I've danced around my kitchen. I plot the energy patterns by drawing them and then dancing them, and I sing them. My phone is full of little weird vocal sketches that I might want to use for a chant or a spell. And I want everyone to understand that writing and performing chants takes work, and witchcraft is an actual craft. So we need to work on our techniques. And sometimes that means learning a chant or an entire ritual whilst we're washing up. And I've done lots of things where I've taped ritual scripts above my sink. So I'm learning the ritual as I'm washing up, or cleaning, or sweeping, or something. So it just takes time. You're not going to be brilliant at it as soon as you start, but it's that choosing, as with all things in magic, it's choosing to actually do something, choosing to start something, choosing to use a tool. It's not just accidentally waving a wand or accidentally singing a note and creating magic, as much as we'd all probably like to be Wingardium Leviosa-ing and everything. It doesn't generally work that way. So we just have to actively choose what we're doing, and we practice it, and then we'll get it.
Gosh, I may or may not have a couple of those little vocal recordings on my phone that you're
It's
talking about.
fabulous.
of Yep, yeah, things I want to remember or learn to sing for later or say. Yeah, and I may or may not have played these on repeat while doing things like washing my hands, doing the dishes,
Yep.
taking a shower.
Because totally,
So this
but I
definitely
mean,
speaks
people
to
go to
me.
rituals and they see, like, say, there's a priestess running a ritual or something, and they're word perfect and all the movements are there, and everyone looks like they really know what they're doing. And it's like, yeah, they do, but that's because they've spent so much time chanting to themselves in the car as they're driving to work. I mean, I've learned so many long charges as I'd be walking to the train station. And I've learned meditations and storytelling in the same way. Like, you just keep walking, and we've over time developed lots of walking chants. Joe, who did your wand making podcast, she's actually in my coven as well, and
Yes,
she's written
yes.
some fabulous walking chants, and we actually were in a band together, so she's the other vocalist as well. So
Ooh, that's cool.
yeah, so there's lots of ways that you can practice, and it's not just someone's word perfect straight away. It does actually take work to do it. It's just that most people don't get to see behind the scenes. So I'm pulling back the temple curtain and letting people know that, yeah, that's because people are chanting to themselves and looking strange as they're walking to the train.
Yep, and also there's the whole point of fake it till you make it, and having that confidence, and doing what you need to do in that moment. Because if you see these high priestesses or high priests or just anybody running a ritual, and they seem so confident in their ability, as you were saying, they could be chanting to themselves as they go to the train station, but they could also be
Totally.
faking it till they make it and trying
Yeah.
to do the best that
And
they
that kind of
can.
brings me into that whole thing of, so you've got the just chanting it as you're walking to the station, but then there's the how do you actually turn that into the actual magical voice. And so there is a difference. So you need to know what you're doing well enough that you can then actually put that magical voice energy behind it. So I've been working with what I call my magical voice for a really long time, because I majored in voice performance in high school, and some of the techniques I learned then came in really helpful when I started practicing witchcraft. I draw on everything that I've done in my mundane life and I pull it into my craft. So learning breath control is fabulously handy for chanting spells. And just because a technique is mundane doesn't mean that we can't use it magically. I can generally hear and feel the subtle or the not so subtle difference in myself when the magical voice kicks in. And I can also hear it in others. And sometimes it's more a feeling, like feeling it rather than hearing it. You know, that moment when you get the goosebumps and the hair raises on your arms when the energy kicks in. The sung note that comes from elsewhere when you're listening to someone perform, that you can feel it within yourself when everything just aligns. So you'll feel the magical voice within, and you'll feel it when someone else is using it. And I think we've all had that moment when even just listening to music, you get that, you can just feel it on the skin, that energy that happens. And that's kind of what we're trying to achieve with the magical voice, I think.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, that doesn't mean that you have to have the perfect pitch or tone. You can definitely accomplish that even
Totally.
if you're tone deaf, quote unquote. Uh, it's about what's coming through behind that actual voice, if that makes sense. It's the energy that's
Yep.
being
And
put
it
in
doesn't have to be
behind it.
loud. It can be really,
Um,
really quiet, but you can feel it. I mean, some of the most intense charges that I've performed
mhm.
in rituals have been really quiet, and they've been whispered into somebody's ear. And that's that energy coming through. It's not about the blowing off the roof with your voice. It's about the change in the energy and the resonance more than anything else. And we will talk a bit about that later, I think, um, on some of the more physical aspects of what we're doing with it. But again, if you need to get used to working with energy. You're not going to achieve the magical voice, or like what I call it, without actually being able to manipulate energy through your own body and around you, because that's part of the skills of rituals and spellcasting, is that understanding the manipulation of energy.
Yeah, and for anybody listening who is not sure how to do that, as it turns
You
out, I just
did.
posted an episode about that.
Yes.
So definitely check that out. It came out, I want to say, in the beginning of 2022. I think I posted either in January or February. But yeah, it's all about energy. Definitely check that out if you are curious on how to manipulate energy, how
Yeah,
to feel
very much
energy,
so. And it was
etc.
good. It was a very good episode too. Yeah, it was good.
Oh, thank you.
Um,
I appreciate
with
that.
our magical voice, we're talking about it from a witch's point of view, but there are actual examples in pop culture that I thought I might touch on because and people might not
Ooh.
get what I'm talking about, which would make sense. So I'd highly recommend, and I know this is going to sound really strange, but the whole information about the magical voice is basically in the Will Ferrell movie Eurovision, The Story of Fire Saga. I know it just sounds bizarre, but the idea of a magical note is woven into the plot. And the movie itself is hilarious and it's quite moving in an excessively camp way. But it also celebrates a delightful belief in elves. So there's something there for everybody, totally. Um, and I don't expect all of the witches out there to hit the mythical Spjorg note that's mentioned in the movie, but I'm just saying that the feeling that it evokes, that difference between the mundane and the magical, that's what you're after, however briefly. So if you go and watch that Netflix movie, there are moments in there where the movie is talking about this note, and when you hear it, that's the thing that actually, that's what you're aiming for. Not necessarily that amazing perfect pitch or sound or anything, but just the feeling that evokes. On the other side of the scale, what I consider to be an absolute masterpiece, it scares a lot of people, but I still think it's a fabulous movie, is the recent folk horror movie Midsummer, because it's so
Oh, I
good.
love that one.
I remember
Love that
I was
movie.
sitting
So
in the
good.
cinema watching that for the first time. We were watching the director's cut actually with a fellow witch, Gil, and we were basically just elbowing each other the whole time because so many of the techniques are things that we use, not some of the more gruesome things, but some of the actual not
No bear
the magical
suits.
techniques, because they basically include intoning, trance work, keening, and energy raising. And also, don't worry if you're not familiar with those terms, because I will go into them a bit later. Um, Unfortunately, the songs that are used in the movie aren't on the official soundtrack. Someone on YouTube's actually gone and cut them all together, but it doesn't quite have the same power out of context, because the way that the music is used is and the songs are used are part of the ritual acts, and so they have their power in the context, but they're really amazing. So in the context of the plot and the rituals, the songs and the keening and the chanting is absolutely incredible. And the director's cut's probably the best one to see because it has more of the ritual bits and they build up a lot more slowly. And a warning, the movie is very, very gruesome, but for fabulous musical and ritual theory, it's incredibly sound. And then of course there's our pagan classic, The Wicker Man, the 1970s one. There isn't another at all. We refuse to acknowledge it. um, Willow's song is a sung spell in that, and it has a great example of how a song can be channeled, like a folk music song can be channeled into a ritual context and sung as a spell. So I want to feel, when I'm performing music in a ritual, I want to feel how Willow's song looks and feels in the movie. I may not be slapping all of the furniture at the same time, but that is something, that feeling. I mean, I also just really want to live on Summer Isle and I want to sing lots of spells and dance in processions, but that's my jam. But that I'm trying to get across those moments in movies and pop culture where that thing that makes the hair raise on your arms, that you feel that energy, and that's the kind of thing you're trying to tap into when you're looking to use the magical voice. So it's not really important what the actual music is. It's more how you use it, what it means to you in the context of your own rituals and music. Because the magic that I like, the music that I like, that's mine. It may not work for you or for other people. So you've got to find the ones that work for you, but something that evokes that incredible magical feeling in you. And yeah, so it's very much so. You've got to find the thing that works for you. It's not going to be for everybody. Um, the other one that I wanted to touch on, which is an older one, but um, about music and energy, that like I've looked at some of the movies, but as I said, I'm going to a concert tonight. If you've been to a concert, you've been to a live gig, you can feel that electricity in the room. It's that energy of hundreds or thousands of people coming together to sing something, and it's incredible, and that's palpable feeling on your skin. And we don't often get to do rituals with like hundreds and hundreds of people, especially not lately, of course. But that feeling, and you can get that from a concert as well, but it is kind of passive. The best example that I can probably think of for how energy is manipulated in a kind of concert situation is, if anyone's ever seen Freddie Mercury's performance with Queen at the Live Aid concert, that back and forth, go watch it if you've never seen it, because it is amazing. I mean, they do it in the movie, but it's not as brilliant as watching the real thing. Freddie Mercury engages the crowd in a call and response, and you can almost see the energy. And he also gets the audience totally engaged with actively participating in the music. And audience participation is something that Queen actually deliberately wrote for, and they explored that. So they were actually trying to get the audience participating, because normally they're just watching. But with Queen, they really tried to do that. And that's some of that feeling that you're trying to evoke. We're not going to be as good as Freddie Mercury, of course. But what you want is when people are singing along, we want to tap into that energy, and we can identify that, and then we can borrow the techniques, because once we can work out what it is that they're doing, then we can start to borrow those techniques. We want to be present in our magic, and we want to explore the ideas of energy manipulation and active participation. And in this case, we want to do it through using our voices. We are taking control and ownership of our voices, of the work, and of the magic that we are trying to do, because we're witches. We're taking control of what it is that we're doing.
Gosh, so when you're talking about going to a concert and just being there and feeling that energy and everything, the electric in the air, I could definitely relate to that. And I've also had the experience of not only fully feeling that myself, but actually being on the other side and being desensitized.
Because you used to work in festivals, didn't you?
Because yes, I did. I worked in the music industry for over 5 years. Not singing or anything, but I did event production, and I did a lot of the stuff behind the scenes backstage. And I did it from like undergrad through grad school. And I cannot tell you, I think the last 2.5 years of me working in that industry, I went from, in the beginning, like always being in the crowd and dancing and like super excited to be there, to the very end of it of me bringing my laptop and writing a term paper in the green room backstage, or taking a nap in my car while there's a full concert going on. And let me tell you, that's a very strange experience, because there's all this energy coming from the crowd, and I'm over here writing about God knows what.
And I work in events too, so I totally understand. But part of that is, if you are in those situations and you do get sensory overwhelmed as well, is to learn how to shield. And to also use whatever physical things that you need as well. So it might be that you need noise-cancelling headphones. You can feel the energy, but you don't want to hear it. So there's all kinds of ways that we can work with identifying what works for us. So yes, you can totally get over being in that concert situation. I totally understand. But also you can use that by going to that to work out what works for you. So do you find that you need to shield in that situation, or do you need to dampen the noise that's coming in? Do you need to sit because the energy around you is too intense that's coming up through your feet? It really depends. So yeah, that's a really good point, Ashley.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen people through my years of concerts where there are some people who will just get overwhelmed being at a concert because the energy is so high. I've also seen people who get so into the music that if they're at the front row and like they're headbanging along or something, I've seen them smash their face into the rail because they're so entranced by the energy and the performer who is essentially directing the crowd that they don't even realize that they're about to.
And that's what actually I wanted to talk about, that manipulation of energy via the voice in like a mundane, it's not actually mundane. I shouldn't call it mundane because that's very insulting. But everything that I've said about performance and manipulating energy is something that you also see in a lot of evangelical and Pentecostal church groups, that people get that buzz, the high of many people singing, that ecstasy. What we're trying to do, and yes, we are using a lot of the same techniques, but don't let that put you off. What we're trying to do is actually own it. We know what we're doing. We're not just trying to push that onto other people. We are owning our own ecstasy when acknowledging our manipulation of energy, because it's often our ritual and magical goal to take that raised energy and to focus it. And we're doing it with consent and with will. So don't let the idea of manipulating energy via the voice put you off if you've been in situations that maybe weren't akin to where your heart lies. It's literally what spell work is about. So that manipulation of energy, that controlling it, that using a lot of voices to work together to raise energy and to focus it in a way that is meaningful for the people that are there, it can be used in many different ways. But if it's used with consent and it's used with will and it's used with the intent to do what the witch is trying to do, then that's a great thing. And that's something that we're actually trying to do. So don't be afraid, basically.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything that you just said. Gosh, it reminds me of, just as a total anecdote, one time I was going to a witch's house and they lived across the street from, I want to say it was like a Pentecostal or a Baptist church. And I want to say it was Pentecostal, because I remember saying to them, I was like, so how is it on Sunday when all of this energy is raised by people who don't know what to do with it? And just, it's kind of sitting in the air.
Yeah.
She's like, I've had to do some things with that.
Our pagan folk band used to rehearse on a Sunday morning, and there was a Baptist church across the laneway. So that was always interesting. There would be harmoniums and pagan chanty stuff happening in our garage, and across the way was the choir singing in the Baptist church. And we were all considerate of each other. It was fine, like, we'd wave and everything. But there was, I'm sure, going down the laneway between the two of those must have been a very interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, churches in general, the energy that they hold are just, it's so varying. I've definitely been in churches before where the second you walk in, it feels very welcoming. I've also been in churches before where I feel like I'm a stranger walking into somebody's home that I don't really know, and I feel very awkward there. Some just have that vibe in general. Also, could just be because I'm pagan. Who knows? But that's the thing, is
you're recognizing that there's something different. So then, if you can actually work with that and find out what it is, identify that, whether it's for good or ill, and that way you can manipulate that energy in your own practice. Because manipulate isn't a bad word in this context, because that's actually what we're doing. So it's don't be afraid of using that. We're not trying to manipulate people to our own will. We're trying to manipulate energy, and we're trying to manipulate our spellcraft, basically. But we need to identify it in the mundane world so we can work it to our magical life, I suppose.
Yeah. So, we've talked a lot about manipulating the energy and identifying having a magical voice, but what are some ritual or magical situations where we would be able to use our voices?
We're doing one now. We are using our voices to speak. Yes, exactly. But we might also be speaking in an actual ritual situation. But most of the time what we're doing is that we're speaking, we're intoning, we're chanting, we're declaiming, and we're singing. And all of these are different types of the ritual voice that we could use. They all have slightly different uses and approaches, of course. But since I'm going to reference a lot of those terms, I thought it might be appropriate to give some definitions, just so we're all on the same page for this. They're not really dictionary definitions as such. They're more basic definitions that work within the context of rituals and magic. So I'll probably call these forms for the moment, just because they're kind of forms of where we'd be using our voices. So speaking, as I said, just talking. In a ritual or a spell, this might be giving an instruction or a statement of purpose. So I am standing here before the altar of X to work the rite of such and such. So that's my statement of purpose. Or I call upon the representatives of the element of fire to cleanse and consecrate this space. We are clarifying what we're doing in the ritual, what we're doing the ritual for, or we're giving instructions to someone else in the ritual space. And of course, we're going to try and do this in a fluid and natural manner, rather than just stopping in the middle of reciting an Orphic hymn and asking someone to pass the salt. It's all about the context. We're still using our voice, but we're probably not using the magical voice, even when we're giving an instruction in a ritual. Then we have a drone, and a drone is usually a single held note for a whole piece of music, against which a melody is sung, hummed, or played. And drones can be produced by the voice alone or by instruments. They're not very common in modern popular music, but they still appear in folk music. And they can be intensely magical and used to anchor energies. And it's amazing how much power and resonance can be found in a single held note. So I've got my harmonium with me, so I'm going to play that so I can play a drone, but I'll just sing one to start with, which is just so if that was held throughout the whole ritual, like not of course for a really long period of time, but just holding a note against someone else singing, that can be classed as a drone. but we can also have it as a musical instrument, and there's lots of musical instruments that make drones. This is a harmonium, which is like a bellows with keys on it. So you can hear the drone coming through, and I'll just sing around it for a bit. Just wait for the note to dissipate. But that's where you've got one note, and then you can just sing around the drone note, and it can create this amazing resonance. And I will go into how we can use drones in ritual a bit later, probably in the next episode, depending on timing. But I just wanted to give an example of what that is. I love drones. We use them a lot.
I feel like I was just transported into like a ritual outside, like for the spring with like,
yep,
a little circle and people dancing around. So that was great. You were using your magical voice real
quick. The harmonium brings that out because it's a wooden instrument and your voice resonates with it really well. I'll talk about shruti boxes at some point, but a shruti box is a wooden box that has like a couple of little wooden slotted keys on it, some reeds, and a little bellows, and it's like a little upright harmonium, I suppose, but you can hold it, and when you play it, you sing across the top of it, and your voice just resonates. You can see lots of clips of them online. They are fabulous. They're used in a lot of Indian music as well, but they are fabulous because the way the voice works with the wood, it's like if you're singing against a recorder, like not the recorder that you do in school, the plastic thing, but a proper wooden recorder. There is a sound that happens between that and the human voice that is absolutely amazing. I'm really lucky that there's someone in my band and in my circle who plays old recorders, and so they're amazing against a drone in ritual. It's like we just happen to be really lucky. We have a lot of musicians. There's also intoning, so I keep mentioning that. It's similar to a drone in that it usually involves a held note. It's mostly a word or a short phrase that's drawn out rather than just a sound. So intoning is often used for names. So if you read an instruction that says, vibrate the name of X, it's usually referring to intoning, not always, but most of the time it would be referring to intoning. If we're singing a note against a drone, or rising up a scale, we might call that intoning too. So what I was just doing with the drone, I'm probably going to call that intoning. I'm singing around the note. But most of the time it's just holding one note with a name. So in our rituals, we often work with the kings of the elements. So we might intone the name of one of the kings. So in this case, Peralta. So I'll just intone the name Peralta and you can see what I mean. So this is a case where you would probably use that magical voice. I don't know if I'll get to it because, there's a lot of stuff to talk about and I probably don't want to use up my short stash of magical voiceness. So So that is an example of intoning a magical name, and you should be able to feel it coming through you. And again, I'll go into how to do that a bit later. We ran a welcoming opening ritual for a gathering a couple of years ago where each person intoned their own name at the same time, magically announcing that they were present. And it was fabulous because it produced an amazing wall of sound and energy, because names have power. So intoning them can be an interesting and useful magical technique. Chanting is something I keep mentioning as well. So a chant is either spoken or sung, but usually it's a short set of lines or stanzas that are repeated, as opposed to something that I'd probably term in this context a declamation, which is a statement of purpose, such as a call to the Sabbath, a poetic story of purpose of the ritual, an evocation and invocation of deity or spirit, a charge, which is speaking the channeled words of a deity or spirit. And a declamation can be spoken or sung. It's a whole piece, not repeated short phrases most of the time. But we often say we're chanting when we actually mean that we're declaiming, most because we're trying to differentiate between what we're doing from just plain speaking to using the magical voice. So think of a declamation probably as a long form chant. Then we have singing. So we sing notes with or without words. We can sing chants. We can sing declamations. We can sing entire songs. We can sing a cappella, which is without accompaniment, or we can sing it with music. But when we use our magical voice is just as important as the form that we are using. And so commonly we'd use our voices for instructional purposes. So I talked about that before. So we would actually be speaking instructions unless you were doing spell casting the opera and singing absolutely everything. We're not really using our magical voice when we're just giving instructions in a ritual. And then I mentioned short form chants. So they would be things like prayers or offerings, power raising, spell work and magic, statements of purpose, and calls to ritual, like a short statement of purpose. Then our long format pieces could be if we're making an offering that's a bit longer, or a dedication, invocations, charges, celebratory poetry, prophecy, actual declamations of something, and storytelling. So all of these can be things that are pre-written or performed with inspired utterance, so ad-libbed. It really depends on your personal style. Some people are really good at ad-libbing in a ritual, others not so much. They need to have something pre-written. You do what works for you. Did you want to comment on any of that, Ashley, before I kind of go into some of the like little techniques and elements of like ritual or anything? Have I confused everything?
Oh no, that was all fantastic. That was a lot of great information. When you first started talking about how using your voice as a form of magic, I could not help but think of the quote from Harry Potter, which completely wrote itself and has no author at all, where Dumbledore says that words are, in my not so humble opinion, our most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both inflicting injury and remedying it. And yeah, I know it's Harry Potter, it's a book series, it's fiction, it's not real. We don't fly on broomsticks or go Hogwarts.
I have used music from Harry Potter soundtracks in ritual. I have used chanted things from Lord of the Rings in ritual. I'm all for incorporating pop culture into things. Happily do it. And I was going to talk about that a bit later, of like where to find your inspiration and use things that work for you, especially when you're starting. Use stuff that you're familiar with. Very much so.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, it's true. Like, words are magic. And if you don't believe me, I mean, you can go up to somebody and just whatever you utter out of your voice can completely make or break their day. You can go up to them and give them a huge compliment, and that can make them happy. Or you can go up to them and say something not so nice, and that might destroy their whole day or week or month. Like, you don't know.
Words have power.
Please don't do that. Be nice to each other. Be kind. But yes, they do have power. Exactly. So your voice is absolutely one of your most basic and biggest magical tools that you have.
And that's why we need to learn how to manipulate them well and to use them. I'm not going to say use them for good. You can use them for whatever purpose you want. But just knowing how to use it and knowing that what you do will resonate on the astral for a while. So do stuff with purpose. The techniques for using the voice in ritual are mostly the same whether you're working by yourself, with a couple of other people, or with groups. So it can be just a bit harder to add in harmony and drones if you're by yourself, but it's not impossible. Like get a harmonium or a recording of one, and you can do harmony and drones by yourself. I have a 4-track recorder on my phone, so I just harmonize with myself all the time. But that's just because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to that. I often use recorded music to support my magical voice, even when working with a group. As I said, like using bits from Harry Potter and from Lord of the Rings. If you find the pieces that work for you, that speak to you and bring your whole body and magical being into alignment, then they are brilliant to use for both solitary and group work. It needs to speak to you on lots of different levels. So I do have lots of examples of chants, snippets of songs and intoning to share, but I thought it might be a good idea to briefly touch on a basic outline of what I call the elements of Wiccan-based ritual. I know not everyone is Wiccan or Wiccan-based that's listening to this, but I just thought I'd give a bit of an outline, just because there's a whole lot of different bits of chanty bits and songs and intoning that can be used in different parts of a ritual liturgy. So if we understand those, then we can work out where it is that we're going to use certain pieces. So these are some examples. So elements of Wiccan-based ritual would be a preamble or a procession or a call to ritual. So the thing that happens before the ritual starts. It's that getting people into that magical mindset. Then creating sacred space or circle casting, power raising, a ritual statement of purpose, which is different to one that you'd be doing right at the beginning. It's like, we're here to celebrate this, come along. It might be in the ritual after we've raised power that you're concentrating everyone on the work that you are doing. So you might have a ritual statement of purpose there. Then we could have an invocation or spell work or divination in our ritual. We could be doing sacred drama or celebration. We could have an act of transformation that's happening. Then we might do a grounding or return and a thanks and farewell. All of these different things can have the magical voice incorporated into them. And it can be, we can do things silently, we can do things spoken, chanted, sung, or performed with gestures. And most of the pieces that we write for our circles can be spoken or sung. And so I did mention that I had a band. So sometimes we have both a ritual version of a song that we use as part of our liturgy, for want of a better word. And we also might have a performance version, which we might use for singing around a campfire or on stage. But you could also go the other way, and you can use beloved lyrics or songs as part of your own ritual. So it's both. Use what works for you, really. Sometimes it might be that you're writing something for your ritual. Another time it might be you're using that killer soundtrack from a fabulous movie that is going to inform what it is that you're doing. And I've written many rituals around pieces of music because they just, as I listened to them, they gave me that ritual form when I listened to the music.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. Also, yeah, speaking on if people are Wiccan or not, I would say not everybody listens to this as Wiccan. There's a lot more people who base themselves around witchcraft, but either way, everything that's covered in this episode should be able to be applied throughout whatever your practice is or your background is.
If whatever practice that you're doing and whatever rituals you're doing or spells, then identifying the different aspects that go into making up how your ritual is structured, whether they're structured or not, is really helpful, because then you can work out ways to make them happen well for you, to improve them, to actually own what it is that you're doing. So just because these are the elements of, say, a Wiccan-based ritual, not like it doesn't have to be an initiatory Wicca, this is like a Wiccan-based kind of ritual. By identifying those, I've worked out where and how I can work out what I'm doing in that ritual. And I know that I want that these to be very specific sections, or I want them to all carry over into one thing. It might be that we're just using one piece of music for the whole ritual, and so everything flows naturally into each other. It could also be that I need very specific sections in the ritual, but I can't do that if I don't know what those sections are to start with. So it's knowing your own ritual formats is really, really good, because then you can work out when you're going to use the magical voice or when you're not. And what's the difference between just speaking an instruction to yourself even and singing all out. Did you want some kind of examples of things? Okay.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You know, I started off I started off saying that, you know, I do a lot of working out stuff when I'm kind of cleaning or washing up or something. And I did promise a sweeping chant. So I do have one. Chants should roll off the tongue. And I'm going to get into accents and things a bit later and working out what works for you. But if you keep repeating it over and over, fast and slow, and it still stays the same, it still works for you, you can still say it well, then your chant will work. If it falls over and gets too run into each other or becomes a tongue twister, then it probably won't work. Chants can just be nonsense words. They can be chants in a different language. They can be used in different parts of the ritual. As I said, if you know what parts of the ritual you want to use something in, then you can write something or find something that's going to work for that section. So the sweeping chant is to be used whilst you're sweeping. It's an active chant because it's being used while someone is moving, and it's very descriptive of what's happening. Because it's an active chant, because we're sweeping, it needs to have places where you can breathe, and it needs to be short and sweet and something that can be chanted over and over again as you're moving. If it doesn't have a rhythm that works with the action that you're trying to do, then it's not going to work for sweeping. I actually made, so this particular sweeping chant is talking about a broom, and I made a broom to use with this chant, and I'll tell you about it in a second. So the chant is, all that be ill be swept away by birch and ash and sickled hay, bound by willow, stung by thorn, tread the mill of the circle born. All that be ill be swept away by birch and ash and sickled hay, bound by willow, stung by thorn, tread the mill of the circle born. And as you can imagine, you're kind of sweeping around the circle as you're chanting that, and it could be many voices or one voice. And so I did make a broom for this chant. It was birch and hay for the bristles with an ash staff. It was bound by willow withy and a hawthorn thorn that's piercing the bristle and staff to pin everything in for stability. And the chant works whether you have a matching broom or not. I just happened to write this particular chant for a large public ritual, and I was making the broom for that. But we use it for lots of things because it just works. So that's our sweeping chant. Do you have any chants that you use for sweeping at all, Ashley, or heard ones?
Yeah, so for our outer court, we do have a besom chant that we use. It's something new that we're starting to do that I had never used before. My working partner, or that was something that they did in their outer court. So I don't know the words off the top of my head, unfortunately. It is a lot longer, though, than this one that you gave, which is part of the reason that I don't know all the words.
And we've got ones that are
to it.
songs as well that can be sung. I mean, I'm not going to do them here, but there's ones that are songs that I've used for sweeping, and like there's a stanza for each round of going around the circle, and they work really well. This one was being used at a public gathering, and it just kind of slipped into place, and it works for that because it's short and it's easy for people to learn. And speaking of like Sabbats, so because that was written for a particular Sabbat for a gathering, the same one. We've used this particular chant. This is a spring equinox chant, and I think I wrote this for the a spring equinox gathering in about 2005 or something, and it just describes what's going on in the Sabbat, basically. And so it can be used for power raising, it can be used for spell work in the Sabbat. It really depends. But it's the moon goes round the earth goes round the sun. When day and night are equal, the greening has begun. The moon goes round the earth goes round the sun. When day and night are equal, the greening has begun. And you can keep chanting that. And you can imagine people like circle dancing to that. It works really, really well. Yeah, so
that sounds really fun.
but it is literally describing what's going on. So it's the spring equinox. So the moon goes round the earth goes round the sun. When day and night are equal, the greening has begun. So that's basically the spring equinox. And so it means that people are getting that by osmosis, even the reason for the season, I suppose, in that particular thing. Of course, some people have different ways that they celebrate the spring equinox. That's fine. This is just a chant that works for this particular event. But that's like a greening one. And then I've got one that's a more of a, instead of power raising, a scrying chant. So this is a dark moon scrying chant, and this is chanted whilst everyone is trance dancing around a cauldron or a bowl of black ink, which is being used as a dark mirror, and everyone's kind of dancing around it, free dancing, and the last person standing scries into the bowl and speaks trance prophecy. So we have like a area in the circle with some cushions around it as well. People are dancing there. They've been doing lots of ritual things. They've built up, so the bowl of black ink has had lots of layers into it of different elemental things, and the last thing that happens is this ink is poured in and it kind of sucks you down as you're looking into the bowl. And so then people start moving and dancing and chanting, and then eventually they will just kind of fall over into the cushions and sit and think and scry inwardly. But the last person that's standing will actually look into the big bowl, and then they will give a trance prophecy for everybody else in the ritual. So the chant for that is, dark the moon and dark the night, bring the gift of second sight. Dark the moon and dark the night, bring the gift of second sight. Dark the moon and dark the night, bring the gift of second sight. And it just keeps chanting. But it also might be that people are dancing around to that in different patterns and different steps, depending on what it is that we're doing. But it can also start really slow and get fast, or it can start really fast. And then as the trance is coming on, it gets slower and slower and slower. So being able to manipulate the tempo, the pitch, and everything of a chant can actually be very important in what it is that you're doing. So use what works for the ritual placement, I think. And probably the most famous ritual placement, I suppose, is circle casting, which is used in a lot of Wiccan-based rituals and for some witchcraft things as well. So this is a circle cast chant. It's only short. It can be spoken or sung, and it again is basically saying exactly what's happening in the moment. So this circle cast chant is: by the blade a circle born, between the worlds a boundary formed, by the powers raised herein to guard without and hold within, be this circle cast. So depending on how long it takes you to get around the circle, you could be saying it slowly, or you could be chanting it over and over again to get you around the size of the circle. Depends on whether it's like a huge one with lots of people or one that's just a tiny one in your bedroom. But that can also be sung. So, and it has a slightly different feel to it when it's sung, which is: by the blade a circle born, between the worlds a boundary formed, by the powers raised herein to guard without and hold within, be this circle cast, be this circle cast. So that's the circle cast song. I've got a couple more chants that move from chant into song and then change their nature. But did you want to talk about any examples of any of those at all, Ashley, before I move on to the big one, the big magical voice piece?
No, you were doing a fantastic job. Please keep going. I'm over here writing notes like, man, that scrying thing's really cool. And like, oh, I never thought about singing as I go around the circle. Like, no. Please keep
passion.
going. I'm loving these and taking
notes. One of these days I will write circle casting the opera, but so this is a famous song, but there's a lot of different versions of it. So this is about sacred drama or transformation, and it's a piece that has the same tune, but it evokes different emotions and it has a different rhythm. So we're about changing the musical style to suit the ritual purpose. So happy versus sad, same tune, different rhythm. Okay, so the first example is Midsummer Song, which is Oak and Ash and Thorn. It's based on the 1906 Kipling poem with the tune by Peter Bellamy, and it's just a famous bit of it that is used. So one that people would be familiar with, which is: oh, do not tell the priests of our dance, for they would call it a sin. For we have been in the woods all night, a conjuring summer in. We give good news by word of mouth, good news for cattle and corn. The sun is rising up in the south by oak and ash and thorn. Sing, oak and ash and thorn, my boys, all on a midsummer's morn. Surely we sing of no little thing with oak and ash and thorn. And it weirdly took me a while to realize that the autumn equinox song that we used in the first grove that I joined was really just using alternative lyrics sung to the same jaunty oak and ash and thorn tune. These lyrics are, of course, more suited to a harvest festival, and I don't know who wrote them, but they go like this, using the same tune, which is: John Barleycorn is cut down dead, it is his time to die. The sun that warmed our summer days no longer is so high. We praise him and our God is fair, we thank them for the corn. We gather in the harvest now and leave the fields forlorn. And then we have the other version. Now, this is a dirge version, which a friend and I wrote it, like we reworked it, and it has some haunting harmonies in it. And we used it for a ritual because the jaunty tune of the autumn version didn't really work when what we were doing in the ritual was a drama enacting the killing of the Corn King. And this bit is really a mood, and it's suited to the magical voice. So normally I'm doing it as a kind of invocation-y thing. It's a transformation. We in the ritual would be mourning the king, so we might have been dancing around him and someone comes up to him with a sickle and it's put to his neck and someone else splashes him with like tomato sauce or wine or something, and he falls to the ground and is covered in a cloth, and we're ritually mourning and keening for John Barleycorn being cut down dead, celebrating it at the same time, but also mourning. So this is how we can take one piece of music and change it to suit a ritual purpose. So John Barleycorn is cut down dead. It is his time to die. The sun that warmed our summer days no longer is so high. We praise him and our goddess fair. We thank them for the corn. We gather in the harvest now and leave the fields forlorn. That's what I'm talking about. So,
Woohoo, that was amazing.
That's what I'm talking
that was
about.
so good.
That's my hopefully perfect example of the magical voice.
No, that was amazing.
But it's the
that was
same
incredible.
piece. So it's just the way that you use it. So feel free to take, a well-known song and change it into a different thing that works for your purpose in your ritual. As long as you're doing it with taste, you got to keep the taste. But that particular piece can also work with a drone. So I'll just set my drone note on this and I'll show you what I mean. So John Barleycorn is cut down dead. It is his time to die. The sun that warmed our summer days no longer is so high. So you can see what I mean about how it can work with a drone as well, and it changes it again. So it's understanding what it is that you're doing with the magical voice and how you're incorporating the music and the songs and stuff into your ritual. And also how many times you've done it, because chants actually build up power over time. They imprint on the astral. And as soon as you begin chanting them, they begin to resonate and they take you to that state of mind. So that dirge version of John Barleycorn is Cut Down Dead. We have sung many, many times. I've sung it in huge amounts of rituals. I've sung it with different people using different harmonies. I've sung it in like a bowl valley where when we sung it and the Corn King was killed, that it echoed off the walls of a valley and everything. I've also sung it really quietly. It really depends. But every time we do it in a ritual, it resonates and impacts on those that have gone before. So it just kind of starts to pick up that energy, which is why it's different using the happy version and the dirge version, is because depending on which one you're using, you'll tap into that different energy of what's gone before. So as with quite a lot of ritual elements, if you have ritually repeated an action so many times that just the act of starting it puts you into that magical mindset and space, and the magical act, in this case a particular chant, becomes the trigger. So what we're doing is we're building up magical intent and patterns that we choose to make magical at some point. It's just that the focus is now automatic or second nature, and that's something that we're trying to achieve. We want to do new things. We also want to do things that are going to resonate, which is why you'll find that there's a lot of rituals and chants and spells and everything that use certain patterns, because they're ones that you can tap into really easily. You get into that space. It's like treading a well-worn path kind of thing.
Agreed. Yeah. It's funny because I'm actually thinking I did an episode on the ritual mindset as well. And definitely, like, these are definitely ways that you can use to trigger yourself to get into these mindsets. Even something like if you're not completely there, what you were talking about earlier, using the broom chant, using something like that from the beginning, even if you don't really feel it when you're holding the broom, as soon as you start kind of singing or chanting or intoning or however you're repeating that,
totally.
It can really help you.
And that's what I mean about, but it's knowing your own triggers. And there's good triggers and there's bad triggers, as you know. And, so you do the things that part of what we're doing over time. And all of this stuff takes time. As a new witch or something, you're not going to get this straight away, and that's fine. It takes quite a lot of turns of the wheel. It takes quite a lot of turns to actually get to this point where you can just tap into something. And that's what, when you're working by yourself or you're working with a group, that you have these internal triggers that you build upon and that you actively create and cultivate so that you can go into these things. That's why it looks really easy for some people, but it wasn't in the start. Everyone had to try. It's just that over time you get established patterns that you can work with as well. And then when you break those patterns, that's also really interesting because it changes the energy as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that.
So I went through a bit of chants, but people are probably thinking, well, yeah, so if I am starting, how do we go about finding and using our magical voice? I will go, because, we can only do so much in one episode, and Ashley did say we're going to do 2. I will do like actual physical techniques of doing things. I've written out that.
And everybody listening will probably understand now why I said
sorry.
we need
it's
to
just
do
like
2.
no verbal diarrhea. But
oh, don't apologize. This is fantastic. Do not apologize.
I wanted to talk a bit about how we can go about finding and using our magical voice. Not so much the technique of it, which we'll go into later because it's about, breathing and standing and all of that. But I think one of the easiest ways is to find some pagan music that you like and learn the lyrics and sing along during your rituals in a focused manner. So just learn something. Find a piece, learn it. If you're working your rituals and magic as a solitary, you want to willfully use music and the voice to take you to states of being that are usually only accessed in group work. So you can use music and voice to layer what you're doing. So gain confidence by singing to yourself, learning how to chant without stumbling over words. Feel the movement of the words as they pass through your body and the notes that resonate with your soul. And this will aid your ritual experience. If you do end up seeking a group or you want to attend a public or semi-private group ritual, you'll also be able to join in with less anxiety than if you had never attempted it before, because learning how to chant takes practice. Learning how to find your own voice takes practice. Learning how to not feel anxious for singing along to something that you have to concentrate on is a skill. It takes time. You're not going to get it all of the time. And also, not every chant or song will work for you. I wanted to talk a bit about emphasis of syllables in chants. You need to work with what works with your own accent. My emphasis and my speech patterns are different to everybody else's. They're also different across continents, across states, across the world. So use your own accent and your own emphasis. You have permission to do this. It's not, you don't have to sing in an accent that is foreign to you just because you've heard it on a recording. So not all chants will work for you. They just don't scan right. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay. So you can find one that does. And this is why it can be important to understand the chants that are used in spells. You need to understand the meanings and the intent before you adapt to what naturally flows well for you. In the next episode, we can explore some of the practical techniques for using the magical voice, as well as some more examples on how to use drones and intoning. And we can also look at incorporating gestures and movement with chanting, and that will probably make things make a bit more sense in how like we use patterns, because if you're dancing something, then the way that you actually emphasize a word or a speech pattern would change depending on how you're chanting it just straight. If you listen to recordings of, say, Dorian Valiente or Joe Gardner or something, you might find that the way that they're speaking something doesn't work in your accent, and that's fine. So you adapt things, you work it out. If you listen to there's a lot of videos on YouTube about people speaking Shakespearean language, the words of Shakespeare in accents that would have been around at his time. And there's puns that become apparent that you didn't know were there, because if you're speaking with a particular accent, there's words that rhyme or that become puns that in our modern accents we wouldn't be picking up on. So there's a lot of work around that. So, if people can work on different accents and everything for Shakespeare, we can do that in our witchcraft. We can know that we don't have to sing along to a very specific accent from someone from the reclaiming tradition in the 1980s that was on a recording. We can use our own accent for something. And I think that's important. So I think people get hung up on something. They're listening to a recording, they're trying to chant something, and it just sounds really silly in the way that they're doing it. And they just get discouraged. Find your own voice. That's perfectly fine, I think. It's your magical voice.
Gosh, you made a really good, or I'm really happy that you brought this up, because I was going to say, if you don't bring this up this episode, we definitely have to talk about the next one. But talking about the accents, when you and I first got together to discuss having or doing these episodes, one of the first things you told me or were giving an example about was how accents can completely change things in ritual. If you're listening to a recording, like you said, like an old school one where they're talking in a certain way, and then you're trying to replicate that, it might not sound the same, or it might sound a little bit different. Or if you're using your own accent, it can completely change the whole ritual. And that really blew my mind. I gotta tell you, after I left that conversation, you know how many people I hit up in the magical community, and I was like, have you guys ever thought about this? Because damn, I haven't, and this makes so much sense. Because there's things that just don't work.
I mean, I've been in circles where someone's gone, "We are a circle within a circle." In Australia, it doesn't work. It sounds very strange. It makes perfect sense if someone's American and singing it, but the way in this translated accent, that doesn't work. The chant works, but it doesn't work in their own accent. Unless you're doing the whole ritual in, we also do lots of things where we will take snippets of languages that are appropriate to the ritual setting that we're using. And in that case, you might be chanting in a particular accent, but that works within the context of the ritual. It's not, I find that if people are chanting not in their own accent for, it might be a more refined accent than their speaking voice. That's perfectly fine. But if they're not using an accent that sits within their own resonance, then it can sound really weird. I do have a friend who is actually an accent specialist and an amazing specialist in the magical voice, and is an actual vocal coach and everything. And I've heard him do things when he does them like incredibly, because he's trained in doing accents, and he's trained in doing them appropriately, and he teaches other people how to do it. I'm not going to try and do an accent for something that doesn't work for my own kind of way of chanting in my rituals, because it'll just sound silly. And I sound silly enough for a lot of other things. So I, don't want to sound silly in my ritual.
Well, you definitely didn't sound silly today. This was so fantastic. I am really looking forward to everything we're going to cover in episode 2. And I really hope all the listeners are too, because again, like I feel so lucky I was able to have this conversation with you. I'm definitely taking a lot of things from this episode and putting them in my notes of things I need to go bug my magical friends about that we all need to do together. Definitely the scrying thing, for example. Definitely.
I just find this stuff fun.
Do that.
I know it's horrifying for some people, but I just find
it is fun. It is fun. I agree with you. I think it's a lot of fun. I mean, I'm not a singer. I sang in middle school. I had a solo at one point, but I was an alto. So, the sopranos got all the main things, but it's still fun. And, I'm one of those people I found through my time as being a pagan that I tend to really like the quote unquote cheesy pagan music. And I never thought I'd be one of those people, but man, like that Reclaiming album that's on Spotify with like the tan background, I think from like the 70s or 80s, there's something about that just slaps. And I'm like, it's not that I hate that I like it, but
it works. Just like, but then you can adapt that for your own thing. It's like there was an album, Ancient Mother, as well, that had a lot of the chants on it. And they were the only ones that people knew because they were recorded, and that's what we had. We didn't have the internet when I started. So it was, you learnt stuff by tape, cassette, that everyone had. It's like before CDs. And and then they would get taped and passed around, and that's why they got used at so many different events, because that's what people learnt. And then, but giving people permission just to themselves to actually write their own, I think is important, because people think, oh no, this is established chant, I can't write my own. It's like, I could never do that. And it's like, yeah, you can. I've done whole workshops on how to write chants. Can't do it in this one, of course, but I've got whole workshops on how to write words of power, and writing chants, and writing invocations and charges, and using words of power in rituals, and then layering them all up on top of each other, because I just enjoy that. I find it fascinating as a practical and intellectual exercise. Not everyone does. I totally understand that. But if you come to my rituals, you'll probably get thrown in the deep end of chanting something.
Yeah, I'm in the process of hosting an outer court with my high priestess Hazel from like the Feast of Torches podcast, and him and I, as we're curating some of our outer court materials and for the Sabbaths and such, we have developed different chants that we would like to use. And I was just talking to him the other night about this one chant that we came up with, because I was telling him, I was like, hey, I really want to have some background drumming with this, because it's going to be fun and exciting and raise a lot of energy. And so I went on Spotify and I was looking up all these different drum beats and like changing the setting of how
Yep.
fast and how slow they went. And him and I were just on a video call going through them and and just like singing at these chants
And
essentially for
that's
like 20
great.
minutes, maybe 15. And it's fun because we're just like, oh, like, well, what about this drum sound? And like, what about that one? And we're just like going back and forth. And it was low-key
Yep.
so much
And we've
fun
done
to do.
rituals that we free chant and free drum. So I'll have drums. I've got quite a few good percussionists and musicians in my circle. So I'm really lucky. And we will have drums and like wind chimes and stuff around the circle. And we might be doing some kind of ritual, and someone will be on one of the big drums using the drumsticks, but just really loosely. So you kind of find the pattern of the invocation, and that becomes the drum. Someone else will be doing the harmonium, because the harmonium itself you can actually do rhythm on because it has a bellow. So if I do this, it's like. So you can kind of hear that you can actually make it. You can move the bellows in a particular rhythm, so that works well. And we have like a long wind chime hung up on the side of the temple, where as the people are kind of trance dancing around the circle, they might just run their fingers along it, and you get this little note of all the wind chimes going down the scale, or so all kinds of stuff, because it builds this energy, and people find. You know how when water finds its level, it's the same kind of thing in that ritual setting, where people will find the bit that works for them in that ritual, and they will just build this wall of sound, this amazing energy of music and chant and dance, and then there'll be things that's like, can we please remember this, because this was really good, can we use this chant again? Sometimes it's gone forever and it's just at the moment, but other times it's like, get out of circle, write it down, and keep using it. So yeah, and it's what moves you. There's no point doing it if it doesn't move you and resonate in your soul. Yeah,
Literally and
totally.
figuratively. Yeah, and I think when I was talking about the quote unquote cheesy pagan music, I think that I had this. I don't want to call it a negative connotation. I think that's a little bit too intense of what I'm trying to portray, but I think that at first I had this kind of like cringe reaction to it because I felt, I don't know, kind of like weird saying like we all come from the goddess. I'm like, oh, like it's kind of cringy sounding as somebody who was new into witchcraft and paganism at the time. But it ended up being one of those things that I found when I kind of just lost myself in that chant and like threw myself into it, there was a completely different undertone that
Exactly.
had that I did not expect or know. And now I'm like, hell yeah, we all come from the goddess. Like it's a fire ass chant. Like I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things we've talked about a couple times now of having to kind of get over those insecurities or anxieties of feeling silly, feeling nervous about doing something, saying something out loud or in your mind. That's definitely a real thing, but it's kind of like being an armchair witch. You can't think yourself out of those anxieties. You can't think yourself out of that
And you can
quote
make it
unquote
your
cringe.
own. You can make it
If
your
you're
own.
feeling
So,
that.
like as I was saying with
Absolutely.
the 3 different
Yep.
versions of the Oaken and Thorn tune, you find the thing that works for you. So you make it and you adapt things for the use that you need them for at that time. I've got songs that I've got 6 different versions of because they've got different ones with choruses, without choruses, chanted, slightly different tunes depending on whether they're played with an instrument or they're sung. And that's because they're being used in the appropriate way for the time that we're using them. And so that's fine. If it's cheesy, great. It makes it easy to remember. Start there.
Yeah, it's one of those things you have to actually just kind of do it and immerse yourself in it. And I mean, hopefully, I don't know. I don't want to come across that I'm dissing any of the songs because, as I've now mentioned a couple of times, actually I really like them a lot. But I think getting into this, I was just like, I don't know. But now I'm all about it. Now I'm like, hell yeah, let's have a whole chant episode. Yeah. I love this shit. Like, this is great. And Gabby, you did such an amazing job this episode. I mean, I'm really stoked to do part 2.
It was fun. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. This was such a fun episode, especially hearing you like sing and play different instruments. Like this has been such a great thing. I mean, seriously, I can't thank you enough for this. So I know we're wrapping up the end of the episode. Is there any final thing that you would like to say about anything that we've talked about before we
Not
close
really. I
up?
think I've got things that I can put in for the next episode. Just if so we have a website. We haven't updated it for a while, but there's a lot of chants there and a lot of rituals, and you can see how rituals are incorporated into chant. My group is called Apple Grove. The website is www.applegroveonline.com. We haven't updated it for ages, so there's a whole lot. There is actually a whole new website that's sitting there ready to kind of go live when we finish it. So some of the terminology has probably changed over time, but there's a lot of stuff there, and there's meditations and there's chants and there's songs and there's all kinds of different things where if you want to look at how you can incorporate chants into rituals, go read some of those. It's all Southern Hemisphere though, so you just need to flip it around in your mind. That's about it, really.
Great. And if anybody wanted to get in contact with you and ask you a question,
just
or anything,
tag me
how could
on
they do
the
that?
Seeking Witchcraft, which is Seeking Witchcraft Facebook group is probably the easiest because I do hang around there a lot. So just tag me through there and then we can chat. That's probably the easiest, I think.
Okay, yeah, and if somebody can't find you, if they want to
Yep.
just tag one of the admins, we can definitely
Yep.
link you up
Yep.
within
I'm
the
on
comments for something.
the British
Um,
Traditional Wicca Discord as well under Blaze. Yep.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you were in the Discord. I'm in there too, but I
Yep.
always forget about the Discord. I don't
Yep.
use a lot of servers at all, so
Yep.
I always forget that exists.
Yep.
I too am on that Discord. Okay. One more thing. So, if you had one piece of advice for a beginner, what would you give them?
Don't be embarrassed and just do it. And even if you're just doing it in your head, it's fine. But give it a go because it opens up a whole new world of ritual and magical and spellcraft possibilities that you maybe didn't know that existed.
I love that. We all have to start somewhere.
Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. If as we mentioned, there is going to be a part 2 of this, but you can find out more about that, and you can get in contact with me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page where I post memes called Seeking Witchcraft Podcast. As Gabby mentioned, there is a Facebook group as well called Witches Seeking Witchcraft, and I have a Twitter. It's at Seek Witchcraft, Instagram at Seeking Witchcraft. And if you'd like to support the podcast and gain access to a Discord page that we do for the podcast, I do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Seeking Witchcraft. All right. Well, I hope everybody has a great night or day or whenever you are listening to this. And Gabby, thanks again so much for coming on. I can't wait for part 2.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.